Welcome to the Contractor Council Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Contractor Council Podcast with Joshua Irvine. Joshua is a business and tax attorney based in Utah who works with construction and trade companies as outside general counsel, helping them get paid, stay compliant, and build stronger businesses. I'm Sean O'Connor, and in this episode, Joshua and I are getting into the kinds of hiring and workforce decisions that seem small at the time, but can turn into expensive problems if they're not handled the right way from the start. Joshua, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
We're going to get into this HR conversation, right? And hiring. The good news, the business is growing, right? We need to hire people. Bad news is it does add some extra back office work, I guess you'd say. I'm curious, what have you seen in terms of the hiring and workforce issues? Where do they go wrong for construction companies in particular, obviously?
Well, probably not unique to construction, probably true of most companies, but the biggest problem in the beginning is really not having any kind of training system or way to help their new team integrate within the company. That could be because you don't have training. That could be because you haven't really designed any kind of culture for the company intentionally. And so kind of just there's a mismatch of skills and expectations from day one. And a lot of times contractors I know hire individuals when they have tons of business and they're super busy, and that their solution to that is hire someone so they can do it. And while that's true, if you don't have the time to teach, train, manage, help, guide, mentor, etc., that might not actually solve your problem. It could make it worse.
What have you seen? What are the common mistakes that you've seen contractors make when bringing on new workers? I mean, you mentioned that, that scenario of hiring someone to do it when it needs to get done. But what other potholes are they stepping in?
One is a little bit of a tax pothole, but they try to treat individuals as independent contractors to save a little bit of money on the.
Yeah, like almost as like an interim step, right? Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, like we're going to save some money on taxes. We're going to just I'm going to subcontract a few things to you. And then if I like it, maybe I'll make you a full-time W-2 employee later. But walking that line really kind of causes some problems from the beginning. So not having a good training system is a huge piece. Number two is not having a good transition with, are you contracted? Are you a direct employee? That kind of dynamic. And then the third is really kind of the idea of delegation. And maybe that's kind of a systems idea. But when you give tasks, are you setting them up to succeed or are you setting them up to fail? Like,
right.
Did you just say, go to the Smith's residence and build them a deck? Or did you walk them through and make sure they know how to build a deck before you send them?
Where do contractors start creating risk in how they classify or structure their workforce? I think this is what we were talking about with you're a W-2 versus a full-time employee. What do they need to look out for?
Yeah, I mean, workers' compensation is a huge one in construction because injuries happen all the time. And what a lot of times contractors misunderstand about workers' comp type claims is it really doesn't matter if somebody was stupid on the job site. If an injury happens, doesn't matter whose fault it was, doesn't matter what they were doing wrong. If an injury happens on your job site, then it's your insurance that's going to be the one holding the bill on that claim. So the first one is kind of making sure that your teams are trained the right way from a safety perspective, and making sure that, you don't create all of those risks unnecessarily, right? So, because, just knowing how to navigate your job site, your team, your approach to this is huge. How do we work together and how do we schedule and how do we, when we show up to a job site, what do we do? What do we not do? Who do we call if there's a problem? So much of this is just by text message and assumptions. It creates problems.
Yeah.
When we just hire people because they might be good at their trade, but have no clue how to function within our individual businesses.
Yeah, that's interesting. It calls to mind for me what, like, around in the city, you'll see, big commercial construction sites, with the 18 days since an injury or accident, and there's, clearly posted rules about you got to be wearing all of these sorts of protective gear to come on the job site. And I'm guessing a lot of that is probably legally required to a degree, but a smaller construction business is still dealing with some of those same issues, it sounds like.
Yeah, they are. The problem with smaller companies is that they are subject to the same rules often, but they just simply don't have full-time compliance officers. And so they rely even more on a few trusted advisors to point them in the right direction so that they can get the right protection and still provide service, even though they don't want to build a skyscraper. That's fine, but they still have to follow safety rules.
Yeah. You'd mentioned classification of employees earlier. I'm curious about payroll taxes, payroll, withholdings. Like, it gets complicated. What happens when it's not handled correctly from the beginning?
I can't speak for every state, but at least in Utah, and I'm going to assume probably most states, wages are probably the most sacred thing that most laws protect. So if you screw up your employees' wages, you as the owner of a company, this is one of the few times this will automatically happen. But if you screw up your employees' wages, the owner of a company is personally liable. Like
Kidding.
this is a big
Wow.
no-no. We don't get to withhold from paychecks without written
Yeah.
consent. We can't garnish stuff without court orders. This is like the sacred stuff here. So that's number
Yeah.
one. And then number two, the IRS or the state tax agency is going to say, and if you don't pay us the portion of the wages that you as a company are obligated, you are also going to be in a huge amount of trouble, because that is a fiduciary that has a special duty attached to it, to pay your taxes for your employees' wages. So if you don't do that, I've seen people go to jail. Like, that's a big no-no. I mean,
Wow.
so like right out the gate,
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
don't have some of those tools, reach out. It's not hard to do it, but if you're trying to do it on your own, because usually you just don't realize it's not as expensive as you think, it's not worth the risk. Just call somebody, call me. I'll point you in the right direction. I don't even do it myself. I hire another company
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to jail for it, though, for not doing it. Yikes. We're talking about exposure. What kind of exposure does a contractor create when there's nothing in writing with their team? Wage theft is a different topic, kind of, but are there assumptions that the team has that need to be in writing?
Well, every
Mhm.
state is different, right? So there are certain laws that are going to trigger based
Oh,
on
yeah.
the size of your company. And then there are other laws that are going to say it's based on your written policy. So if you have 15 employees or 40 employees or 50, I use those three numbers because certain laws, at least in Utah, start to trigger when you're at 15 employees, 40, and 50. If you're under that number, there
Yeah,
are
you're
certain laws that
just
won't
exempt from
automatically trigger. But then there's this umbrella that says, well, unless you have a written policy for something. And so that kind of like dovetails into this big liability issue of, do you actually have an HR policy manual or not? And if so, what's in it? And like lots of other documents that
Yeah.
people are generating online, is that document even legit?
Yeah, is it relevant to the state you're working in? Yeah.
Right.
Because I've heard cases of that, like, they were using AI and it generated all this, based on the laws and regulations. It was an attorney reviewed it, and they're like, these are not Utah state laws, or the AI kind of hallucinated, or whatever the term is.
I've seen it a lot. A lot of contractors don't have HR policy manuals. And it could be for really silly things. Like if you're talking about liability exposure, Do you pay out PTO when an employee either is quit or fired, right? In Utah, there's not a law that obligates you one way or the other. It says you have to follow your written policy. Okay. What if you don't have one? And then you start picking and choosing. Well, I'll pay you out, but I won't pay you out. Now you start getting into a big problem of, have you created a policy, an implied policy? And again, it's just hard.
And you didn't give me the benefit of it or something.
Yeah. It's just one more thing that I know contractors oftentimes say, I can only do so much in my life, in my day, in my business. And that one is way down the list of priorities until it's not. So
I was thinking about being a contractor, but now forget about it. There's too much paperwork.
there's a lot.
You mentioned, I think, workers' comp. I'm wondering, how do workers' compensation or insurance issues turn into major problems? Because, I think from what you said, if I am legitimately just a freelancer, I'm a contractor, I'm on site hammering nails for you, I'm guessing I'm still, and I get hurt, right? Like, even though I'm not an employee, there's going to be a workers' compensation issue there.
Yeah, well, and you say issue, like, so let me just kind of paint how it works. Again, workers' comp is unique in every state. In Utah, we have, the general rule is that the general contractor is liable for all of the injuries that happen on the work site to them, to their direct employees, and to their subs, which we call a statutory employee or an employee by law. And the only way to waive that dynamic is for the general contractor to have a written agreement with the sub that shifts the responsibility to the sub. And the sub has to get their own insurance, proving that the general is covered by them.
Like, I'm going to want to see the
certificate of insurance.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was going to say affidavit, but I don't think that's the right thing.
No, you got to do that. And if you don't do that, then the general's liable. And I've seen a lot of times generals get in trouble because they don't realize about that employee by law dynamic. And so then they get hit twice because an injury happens on the job site and then they file a claim. Maybe the general didn't have workers' comp at all because they're like, well, I don't have employees. Why would I have workers' comp? They didn't realize this other side of it. And so they get a penalty from the state saying, you did not have proper insurance. And then they get hit with the actual cash bill for the workers' comp claim because they don't have insurance to cover it. They're paying for it out of their own pocket. So I'm like, super hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to ask you if, you could walk us through a situation where, a hiring or HR mistake turned into a much bigger financial or, even legal problem. And that's what you just described, of course, it's not quite a HR mistake. It's an insurance issue, a regulatory issue, I guess, related. But do you have anything off the top of your head that's like, oh, this happened and it turned into a big nightmare?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a good HR example. This happens a lot in the construction space. I will say, because this is going to be online, I won't use any of the words, but in the construction world, there's a different set of words that are used as all of their adjectives. It's very common that everything is F this and F you.
No, a lot of like the job site's a rough place.
It's salty words, right? So
like working on a fishing
which
boat.
Is fine. Like that's part of that culture that in that industry. But there are, especially when you start mixing races and genders and ages,
oh my God,
in that whole little mix there, you're going to find people that feel like a certain word is offensive and a certain tone is derogatory or harassing or sexual. And all of a sudden you end up with a lawsuit potentially against your company because your foreman said something to one of your subcontractors on the job site because your foreman didn't think it would matter to anybody. And your subcontractor was very offended by it, right? So those kinds of issues come up. You can't ever prevent them 100%, but having a monthly or a quarterly company training, and every once in a while saying, hey, here are some things to avoid. Like, don't throw stuff at your employees. Don't tell these kind of jokes to your male or female counterpart, staff members. Like you would think this is obvious, but it's not.
Well, and all like you said, there's the monthly meeting, but then also that lawsuit comes. It's like, hey, do you have a policy about that, by the way? And it'd be nice. I'm guessing it would be good if you as the contractor could pull out page 17 that says, hey, these kinds of behaviors we don't tolerate. Like, does that help you sort of deal with that lawsuit, if you will? At least you were trying to do train people properly.
Yeah, it definitely helps when people make those kind of claims and they're saying, hey, the environment was toxic. It was, this is the pattern from the top down, right? They're trying to get the company on the hook for something. And you're like, no, actually, here's our training history. Our staff shows up. Here's our policies. Everybody signs on to it, and that particular employee has been written up for that before or something like that, right? So, yeah, having that in place can be super helpful.
Yeah, I imagine so. To wrap up, I want to ask you one last question for this session. And, if a contractor listening out there now knows that, their hiring or HR setup isn't solid, what's the first thing they should try to lock down?
Given the world today, and given how I know lots of contractors hire employees, is to make sure that you have an actual employment verification process. So that you as a company are not liable for hiring people that are not authorized to work. That's probably biggest bang for your buck out the door, is to make sure that you actually
citizenship issues or
work authorization
issues
stuff.
or
It's called
permits to
I-9
work,
compliance, but a lot of times people just say if you can swing a hammer, you're hired, but that's not a defense anymore. So that one's probably number one. Number two would be an employee handbook. Kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, that we were talking
Both
about.
of those.
Well, Joshua, thank you for super interesting. Thanks for the all your information, expertise, and such. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, welcome anytime.
Thanks for listening to the Contractor Council Podcast with Joshua Irvine. If you're a contractor or business owner and you want to make sure your contracts, systems, financial processes, HR documentation are set up to protect your work and your bottom line, you can learn more at Joshua's website, irvine-legal.com. Don't forget to subscribe or leave a review or share a link with someone in your world who could benefit from this kind of information. Super helpful. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.